Welcome, dear listener, to a gentle journey through the misty corridors of medieval history. Tonight, we shall explore together the fascinating and often misunderstood world of those who were called witches in centuries past. Let yourself settle comfortably wherever you are, perhaps sinking deeper into your pillows, allowing your breathing to slow and deepen as we embark on this peaceful exploration of ancient practices and forgotten wisdom. The flickering candlelight of medieval times illuminates stories that have been whispered through generations, tales that blur the line between history and legend, between healing and mystery. Tonight, we shall walk softly through these stories, uncovering the real rituals and practices of medieval Europe's cunning folk, wise women, and those who lived on the edges of society, carrying knowledge that was both feared and desperately needed. As we begin this journey together, imagine yourself stepping through the threshold of time itself, leaving behind the rushed pace of modern life. Feel yourself moving gently backward through the centuries, past the Industrial Revolution, past the Renaissance, settling softly into the medieval world where our story unfolds. The air here is different, cooler, filled with the scent of wood smoke and herbs, where the boundary between the natural and supernatural world was gossamer thin. In this world we're about to explore, magic was not the dramatic spectacle of fairy tales, but rather a quiet, intimate practice woven into the fabric of daily life. The rituals we'll discover tonight were performed by ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges, seeking healing, protection, love, and answers in a world that could be harsh and unpredictable. Let your mind open gently to these ancient ways of understanding the world as we explore together what these so-called witches actually did in the privacy of their cottages and sacred spaces. Take a deep breath now and let yourself truly arrive in this moment of storytelling. Feel your body releasing the tensions of the day as we prepare to journey together through the gentle mysteries of medieval ritual and belief. The cottage stands at the edge of the village, where the cultivated fields give way to wild meadows and ancient woods. Smoke rises lazily from its chimney, carrying with it the mingled scents of herbs that grow in neat rows beside the weathered wooden door. This is the home of someone the villagers might call a cunning woman, a wise woman, or perhaps in whispered tones, a witch. But let us pause here in this imagined doorway and gently consider what that word truly meant in medieval times. The witch of historical reality was far different from the cackling figures of later folklore. She was more often a healer than a harmer, more often sought out than feared, though fear would come to surround such figures as the centuries progressed and political and religious tensions grew. The woman we might meet at this threshold would likely be someone who had learned the properties of plants from her mother or grandmother, someone who understood the rhythms of the natural world in a way that allowed her to predict weather patterns, to know when herbs were most potent, to sense the subtle energies that medieval people believed flowed through all living things. Let us step inside this cottage now, moving slowly and quietly, as if we were honored guests being welcomed into a sacred space. The interior is dim and peaceful, lit by the warm glow of a central hearth. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the wooden beams overhead, lavender for calm and sleep, rosemary for remembrance and protection, elderflowers for their healing properties, and countless others whose names have been preserved in old manuscripts and whispered traditions. On rough wooden shelves, we might see clay pots filled with mysterious substances. Not the exotic ingredients of Hollywood imagination, but simple things gathered from the local landscape. Acorns ground into flour, berries preserved in honey, bark stripped from specific trees during certain phases of the moon, and always, always, salt, that precious substance that was believed to purify and protect. The first ritual we encounter in this peaceful cottage is one of the most common and most misunderstood practices of medieval folk magic. the creation of protective charms. Imagine watching as gentle hands work by candlelight, carefully selecting small objects that hold special meaning. A smooth stone from a riverbed, worn soft by countless years of flowing water. A small piece of iron, perhaps an old nail, believed to ward off malevolent spirits. A sprig of rowan, that tree whose red berries were thought to offer powerful protection. These items would be wrapped carefully in a piece of cloth, often linen that had been blessed or worn by someone dear. The wrapping itself was a meditative process, each fold made with intention and care. Sometimes words would be spoken over the charm, not the dramatic incantations we might imagine, but simple prayers or phrases passed down through generations, asking for safety, for health, for protection from harm. Such charms might be sewn into clothing, hidden in the corners of houses, or buried beneath thresholds. They represented not evil magic, but rather the deeply human desire to feel safe in an uncertain world. The ritual of creating them was as important as the charm itself, a moment of focused intention, of connection with forces greater than oneself, of hope made tangible through simple actions. Let us move deeper into our exploration, imagining now the gentle practice of herb gathering, which was itself a ritual filled with meaning and ceremony. Picture the early morning hours, when dew still clings to the grass, and the world is hushed and peaceful. This was the preferred time for gathering medicinal plants, when their essences were believed to be most potent and pure. The wise woman walks slowly through meadow and woodland, her steps careful and deliberate. She carries with her a small knife, often made of silver or blessed iron, and a woven basket that has been used for this purpose for many years. But the gathering is not simply a matter of cutting and collecting. Each plant must be approached with respect, with gratitude, with an understanding of the relationship between harvester and harvested. Before cutting any herb, she might speak to it gently, explaining the purpose for which it would be used. For healing the fever of young Thomas, she might whisper to a willow branch, or for easing the birthing pains of Margaret's daughter, to a patch of chamomile. This was not seen as superstition, but as a natural courtesy extended to the living world, an acknowledgement that plants, like humans, possessed a form of consciousness that deserved recognition and respect. The timing of the harvest was crucial. Certain herbs were gathered only during specific phases of the moon, others only on particular days of the week. Some required collection at sunrise, others at sunset, still others in the deep of night when the moon was dark. This wasn't arbitrary tradition, but reflected generations of careful observation about when plants contained their highest concentrations of active compounds. Imagine the peaceful ritual of hanging the freshly gathered herbs to dry. Each bundle is tied with thread or thin strips of cloth, then suspended from the cottage beams. The wise woman moves slowly and methodically, ensuring that each plant has enough space around it for air to circulate, that the leaves don't touch and risk molding, that everything is positioned to catch the gentle warmth that rises from the hearth. As the herbs dry, they release their fragrances into the cottage air, creating a constantly changing symphony of scents that would tell the story of the seasons. Spring might bring the green freshness of new nettle and cleavers, summer the heady sweetness of elderflower and rose petals, autumn the earthy richness of roots and barks gathered before the first frost. Now, let us turn our attention to one of the most intimate and personal of medieval magical practices, the creation of love magic. But here we must step carefully away from modern misconceptions and approach this topic with the same gentle understanding we've brought to our other explorations. The love magic of medieval cunning folk was rarely about forcing unwanted affection or manipulating another's will. Instead, it was more often about enhancing one's own attractiveness, building confidence, or creating opportunities for connection. It was about working with the natural energies of attraction and affection, not against them. Picture a young woman sitting by her window in the soft light of evening, carefully preparing what might be called a love charm. She begins with a small mirror, perhaps nothing more than a piece of polished metal, but precious nonetheless. By candlelight, she gazes into her own reflection, speaking words of affirmation and self-love. This was understood to be the foundation of all attraction magic. One must love and value oneself before seeking love from others. She might then prepare a small sachet filled with herbs associated with love and attraction. Rose petals, naturally, for their connection to Venus and the heart. Lavender for its sweet scent and calming properties. Perhaps a pinch of cinnamon for its warming, stimulating effects, or a few cardamom seeds for their exotic fragrance. Each ingredient is added mindfully, with clear intention and gentle ceremony. The finished charm might be worn close to the heart or placed beneath her pillow to influence her dreams, or carried in a small pouch during social gatherings. The power was believed to lie not in the herbs themselves, but in the intention and energy invested in their preparation, and in the confidence that carrying such a charm might give to its creator. Sometimes love magic took the form of food preparation, what we might now call kitchen witchery. Imagine the careful selection of ingredients for a meal intended to create warmth and affection between people. Honey for sweetness, herbs that warm the body and lift the spirits, bread baked with extra care and attention. The cook would invest each step of preparation with intention, stirring clockwise to bring things together, seasoning with herbs chosen for their symbolic as well as culinary properties. The sharing of such food was itself part of the ritual. Meals prepared with magical intention were believed to create bonds between those who partook of them, to generate feelings of warmth and connection. This wasn't seen as manipulation, but as an expression of hospitality and care, a way of nurturing relationships through the ancient medium of shared nourishment. Let us drift now into the realm of healing magic, perhaps the most important and widespread of all medieval magical practices. In an age before modern medicine, when a simple infection could prove fatal and childbirth was fraught with danger, the healing arts were quite literally matters of life and death. Imagine entering a cottage where someone lies ill with fever. The wise woman arrives carrying her leather satchel of remedies, but her work begins before she even touches her herbs. She studies the patient carefully, not just the symptoms of the body, but the state of the spirit, the balance of energies, the harmony or discord in the person's life that might be contributing to their illness. Medieval healers understood disease as a disruption of natural balance, and their treatments aimed to restore that balance through multiple approaches. Physical remedies? Yes. Herbs to break fever, poultices to draw out infection, teas to calm the stomach or ease the lungs. But also spiritual remedies, prayers and blessings, the creation of healing talismans, rituals designed to strengthen the patient's connection to the forces of life and recovery. The preparation of herbal medicines was itself a ritual process. Water for teas might be drawn from a specific spring known for its purity or collected during a particular phase of the moon. The herbs would be measured not just by quantity, but by intuition and experience, with adjustments made based on the patient's constitution, the season, and countless other subtle factors. Imagine watching as the healer prepares a fever-breaking tea, willow bark for its natural salicylates, elderflower to promote sweating, peppermint to cool and soothe. Each ingredient is added to the pot with ceremony, often accompanied by whispered words of intention. Let this bark draw out the heat, let these flowers open the pores, let this mint bring cooling relief. The brewing itself becomes a meditation. The healer sits beside the fire, watching the steam rise from the pot, inhaling the mingled fragrances, sensing the moment when the tea has reached its optimal strength. Time moves differently in such moments, not by the clock, but by the subtle rhythms of the natural process unfolding. When the tea is ready, it is strained through clean cloth and served in a cup that might itself be chosen for symbolic reasons. The act of giving the medicine is as important as the medicine itself. The gentle words of encouragement, the caring touch, the transmission of confidence and hope from healer to patient. But healing magic extended far beyond the treatment of physical ailments. Medieval wise women were also called upon to address what we might now think of as psychological or emotional disturbances. Someone suffering from persistent nightmares, unexplained anxiety, or what medieval people might have called spiritual oppression, would seek remedies that addressed both the symptoms and their perceived spiritual causes. Such treatments might involve the burning of specific herbs to purify the air and create a sense of peace. Frankincense and myrrh when available, but more commonly local plants like sage, rosemary, or juniper. The smoke was believed to carry away negative influences while invoking protective energies. The patient might be given an amulet to wear, not a dramatic pendant, but perhaps simply a small bag containing herbs chosen for their calming properties, along with a written prayer or protective symbol. The creation of such an amulet would involve the patient in the healing process, asking them to participate in their own recovery by carrying this tangible reminder of their intention to heal. Sometimes the ritual would involve the symbolic casting away of the illness or negative influence. The patient might be asked to breathe into a piece of cloth, which would then be burned or buried, carrying away with it the unwanted condition. Or they might write their fears or symptoms on a piece of bark or parchment, which would then be dissolved in water or consumed by fire. These practices worked not through supernatural intervention, but through their psychological effects. The comfort of feeling that something concrete was being done, the reassurance of participating in ancient traditions, the sense of support from someone who understood both herbs and human nature. Let us turn now to the seasonal rituals that marked the turning of the year in medieval magical practice. These celebrations were deeply connected to the agricultural cycle and the natural rhythms that governed rural life, but they also served as important community bonding experiences and opportunities for magical working. Imagine the approach of Beltane, the spring festival that marked the height of the planting season. In the days leading up to this celebration, wise women throughout the countryside would be busy preparing special herbal mixtures designed to bless the crops and ensure their fertility. Flower petals gathered at dawn, spring water drawn from sacred wells, seeds blessed with prayers for abundance. On the morning of Beltane itself, picture the gathering at the village green as the sun rises. A great bonfire has been built, not just for warmth and light, but as a focal point for the community's shared intentions for the growing season. Into this fire, people cast offerings, perhaps a handful of last year's grain, a sprig of flowering hawthorn, a written wish for the prosperity of their families and livestock. The wise woman might lead the community in blessing rituals for the planted fields. Carrying a container of holy water mixed with herbs, she would walk slowly along the boundaries of the cultivated land, sprinkling the mixture while speaking words of protection and encouragement for the growing plants. This wasn't seen as superstition, but as a natural extension of the care and attention that successful farming required. Young couples might jump over the dying embers of the Beltane fire, a ritual designed to ensure their fertility and bind them together in love. Pregnant women would pass close to the fire, but not too close, seeking its blessing for safe delivery and healthy children. Livestock would be driven between two smaller fires, a practice believed to protect them from disease and ensure their productivity through the coming year. The celebration would continue through the day with dancing, feasting, and the crafting of flower crowns and garlands. But underlying all the festivity was a serious purpose: the community coming together to align its collective energy with the life-giving forces of spring, to participate consciously in the great cycles of death and rebirth that governed their agricultural existence. As summer deepened toward harvest time, different rituals would mark the changing season. The gathering of herbs reached its peak during the warm months, and wise women would organize communal expeditions to collect the year's supply of medicinal plants. These gathering parties were both practical and sacred, opportunities to share knowledge between generations while honoring the plant world that sustained human life. Picture such a gathering on a warm August morning. A group of women and children moves slowly through meadow and woodland, each carrying baskets and small knives for cutting. The experienced herbalists teach the younger ones how to identify valuable plants, how to harvest them without damage to the root systems, how to sense when a plant is at its peak potency. But the teaching goes far beyond botanical identification. Stories are shared, how grandmother used this plant to ease difficult childbirths, how a particular herb once saved the life of someone's husband when fever threatened to take him, how certain combinations of plants could ease the pain of arthritis or improve the memory of elderly relatives. Each plant gathered becomes part of a continuing story, a link in an unbroken chain of knowledge passed from one generation to the next. The wise women speak of the plants not as mere objects to be harvested, but as allies and teachers, each with its own personality and preferences, its own gifts to offer to those who approached it with respect. The processing of the harvest becomes another ritual opportunity. Picture the careful washing of roots, the methodical stripping of leaves from stems, the patient work of crushing seeds and sorting berries. Each task is performed with attention and gratitude, often accompanied by songs or stories that help pass the time while honoring the work being done. Some herbs require special treatment, flowers that must be dried in complete darkness to preserve their color and potency, roots that need to be sliced and dried in specific patterns, seeds that must be stored in particular containers to maintain their viability. The wise woman oversees this process like a conductor directing an orchestra, ensuring that each plant receives the treatment that will best preserve its healing properties. As autumn arrives and the harvest season reaches its peak, we encounter some of the most important magical rituals of the medieval year. The successful completion of the harvest meant survival through the winter months, and so the ceremonies surrounding this time were invested with particular gravity and significance. Imagine the ritual blessing of the grain as it was brought in from the fields. The wise woman might prepare special water infused with protective herbs, which would be sprinkled over the harvested crops as they were stored in barns and granaries. Prayers would be spoken, asking for the grain to remain free from rot and vermin, for the stores to last through the winter months, for there to be seed enough left over for next year's planting. The first and last sheaves of grain often received special treatment. The first might be woven into a corn dolly, a decorative figure that would hang in the farmhouse throughout the winter as a symbol of the harvest's success and a promise of next year's renewal. The last sheaf might be left standing in the field for a time, a gift to the spirits of the land that had provided so generously. Preservation magic became particularly important during harvest time. Wise women would prepare special salt mixtures infused with preservative herbs designed to keep meat fresh through the winter months. They would create blessing rituals for the smoking and curing processes, investing these practical activities with spiritual significance that elevated them beyond mere food preparation. The brewing of ale and the making of wine were also surrounded by ritual practice. The fermentation process itself was seen as magical. The transformation of simple grains or fruits into intoxicating beverages through the action of invisible yeasts that medieval people understood as spirits or fairies. Wise women might be called upon to bless the brewing process, to ensure that the fermentation proceeded properly and that the finished product would bring joy rather than sickness to those who consumed it. Picture the careful preparation of a batch of harvest ale. The wise woman arrives at the brewery carrying a small pouch of special herbs, perhaps hops for their preservative and flavoring properties, but also rosemary for remembrance, sage for wisdom, and a pinch of blessed salt for purification. Each ingredient is added to the brewing mixture with ceremony and intention, while words are spoken asking for the ale to bring health, happiness, and good fellowship to all who share it. The timing of brewing was considered crucial. Many believed that ale brewed during a waxing moon would be stronger and more potent, while brewing during a waning moon might result in a weaker product. The brewer would consult not only the phases of the moon, but also the weather patterns, the quality of the water, and even the emotional state of those involved in the process. As winter approaches in our gentle journey through medieval magical practice, we encounter rituals designed to provide protection and comfort during the dark months ahead. The wise woman's cottage becomes a beacon of warmth and security, a place where people can come seeking remedies for the ailments that winter brings, and talismans to guard against the spiritual dangers that were believed to be most active during the season of cold and darkness. Imagine the preparation of winter protection charms designed to guard houses and their inhabitants against both physical and spiritual threats. Iron nails might be blessed and hung above doorways, believed to prevent the entry of malevolent spirits. Bundles of dried herbs, rowan, elder, and hawthorn, would be woven together and hung in windows, creating barriers that negative influences could not cross. The wise woman might prepare special candles for the winter months, dipping them in wax that had been infused with protective herbs and oils. These candles would be lit during the longest nights, their flames serving not only to provide light and warmth, but also to create sacred space and invoke the protection of beneficial spirits. Salt magic becomes particularly important during winter. Picture the ritual preparation of blessed salt, made by mixing ordinary salt with herbs gathered during the summer months and blessed under the full moon. This salt would be sprinkled on windowsills and doorsteps, creating protective barriers around homes. It might also be added to cooking pots, both for its preservative properties and for its spiritual protective qualities. The long winter evenings provided time for more elaborate magical workings. Wise women might spend these quiet hours creating complex herbal preparations that required days or weeks of patient attention. Tinctures that needed to be stirred at specific intervals, oils that required slow infusion over gentle heat, salves that must be prepared in small batches and aged until they reached perfect consistency. Picture the peaceful scene of a cottage workshop on a snowy evening. The wise woman sits beside her fire, working by the warm light of candles and hearth flames. Before her on a wooden table are arrayed the tools of her trade: mortars and pestles for grinding herbs, small glass bottles for storing tinctures, strips of clean linen for straining preparations, and always notebooks where she records her recipes and observations. The preparation of each remedy becomes a meditation. The rhythmic grinding of herbs in the mortar, the careful measurement of ingredients, the patient stirring of mixtures as they heat over the fire. Time moves slowly in this sacred space, governed not by clocks, but by the natural rhythms of the work itself. Sometimes the winter evenings would be spent in divination, attempts to peer into the future and gather information that might help in planning for the year ahead. But medieval divination was not the dramatic fortune-telling of popular imagination. Instead, it was a subtle practice of reading signs and patterns, of paying attention to omens and portents that might provide guidance for practical decisions. The wise woman might practice scrying, gazing into a bowl of water or a piece of polished metal until images formed in her mind. These visions were understood not as literal predictions of the future, but as symbolic communications from the deeper wisdom of the unconscious mind. A dream of flowing water might suggest that emotional healing was needed, while visions of growing plants might indicate that it was time to begin planning for spring activities. Divination with herbs was also common. The wise woman might cast dried leaves or small seeds onto a cloth, then study the patterns they formed for symbolic meaning. Or she might burn specific herbs and interpret the shapes and movements of the smoke. These practices required years of training to master, as the practitioner learned to distinguish between meaningful patterns and random chance, between true insight and wishful thinking. Weather prediction was another important form of divination, crucial for agricultural communities that needed to know when to plant, when to harvest, when to prepare for storms. Wise women developed sophisticated methods for reading atmospheric signs. The behavior of animals, the appearance of clouds, the direction and strength of winds, the feel of the air on their skin. But perhaps the most important divination practice during the winter months was dream interpretation. In the long darkness of winter nights, dreams were believed to carry special significance, messages from the spirit world that could provide guidance for the living. The wise woman might be called upon to help interpret particularly vivid or troubling dreams, or to provide herbs that would encourage prophetic dreaming. Picture someone arriving at the cottage in the early morning, troubled by a dream that has left them anxious and confused. The wise woman listens carefully to the dream narrative, asking gentle questions to clarify details and understand the dreamer's emotional response. She considers not only the symbolic content of the dream, but also the dreamer's life circumstances, their recent experiences, their fears and hopes. The interpretation she offers is not definitive, but suggestive, possibilities to consider, aspects of life that might need attention, potential courses of action that the dream might be recommending. She might also provide herbs to help the dreamer process their experience. Chamomile tea for calming anxiety, lavender sachets to promote peaceful sleep, or perhaps mugwort to encourage further dreaming if more guidance seems needed. Sometimes the wise woman would teach the dreamer techniques for continuing the dialogue with their unconscious mind. Methods for remembering dreams more clearly, practices for asking specific questions before sleep, ways of interpreting recurring dream symbols that might appear over time. As our journey through the winter season of medieval magical practice continues, we encounter the most solemn and profound of all ritual activities: the preparation for death and the ceremonies surrounding the transition from life to whatever lies beyond. In an age when death was a frequent visitor to every household, wise women played crucial roles in helping communities cope with loss and in preparing the dying for their final journey. The sick room of someone who was dying became a sacred space, carefully prepared to ease the transition and provide comfort to both the dying person and their loved ones. Picture the wise woman arriving with her bag of special herbs and oils, moving quietly and purposefully as she begins the rituals of preparation. First, the space itself would be cleansed and blessed. Herbs might be burned to purify the air, frankincense if available, or more commonly, sage, rosemary, or cedar. The smoke was believed to carry away negative influences and create a peaceful atmosphere conducive to the soul's departure from the physical body. The dying person might be anointed with oils that had been blessed for this purpose. Olive oil infused with herbs associated with peace and transition, perhaps lavender for its calming properties, or rose for its connection to the heart and to divine love. The anointing would be done gently and reverently, often accompanied by prayers or soft singing. Herbal preparations played important roles in easing the dying process. Pain-relieving herbs like willow bark or poppy preparations might be administered to provide physical comfort. Herbs believed to ease anxiety and fear, chamomile, lemon balm, or valerian, would be prepared as gentle teas or aromatherapy treatments. But perhaps most importantly, The wise woman would provide emotional and spiritual support, helping the dying person and their family navigate this profound transition. She might lead them through meditation practices designed to help release attachment to earthly concerns, or guide them in reviewing their life to find meaning and completion in their experiences. The moment of death itself was surrounded by ritual observation. The wise woman would watch for the subtle signs that indicated the soul's departure, changes in breathing, the particular stillness that comes over the features, the sense of presence giving way to absence. She might speak words of blessing or guidance, helping to ensure that the soul's journey to the next realm proceeded smoothly. After death, the preparation of the body became another sacred ritual. The wise woman would wash the deceased with water that had been blessed with herbs, dress them in clean clothing, and arrange their hands and features in poses of peace and dignity. Protective herbs might be placed with the body: rosemary for remembrance, rue to ward off evil influences, flowers chosen for their symbolic significance. The vigil over the body provided opportunities for community healing as well as honoring the deceased. Friends and family would gather in the presence of the wise woman, sharing memories, expressing grief, beginning the long process of adjustment to loss. Herbal preparations might be provided to help mourners cope with their emotions. Teas to calm anxiety, aromatherapy treatments to ease depression, strengthening tonics for those whose grief threatened to overwhelm their physical health. The burial itself would be surrounded by protective rituals designed to ensure the peace of the deceased and the safety of the living. Salt might be sprinkled around the grave to create a protective barrier, while herbs associated with blessing and purification would be cast into the earth along with the body. But the wise woman's role in death-related ritual extended beyond the immediate crisis of dying and burial. She would also be called upon to help with the phenomena that medieval people believed could follow death: the appearance of ghosts, the sense of unfinished business that might keep a soul earthbound, the grief reactions of survivors that might require spiritual as well as emotional healing. If a house seemed to be troubled by the presence of a restless spirit, the wise woman might perform cleansing rituals designed to help the soul find peace and move on to its proper realm. These ceremonies would be conducted with great solemnity and respect, acknowledging the reality of the spiritual presence while gently encouraging it to release its attachment to the physical world. Such rituals might involve the burning of specific herbs believed to facilitate communication with spirits, the creation of temporary altars where offerings could be made, or the recitation of prayers designed to help the soul understand that its earthly life had ended and that it was time to journey onward. For the living who remained, the wise woman would provide ongoing support through the mourning process. She understood that grief was not simply an emotion to be overcome, but a spiritual journey that required time, patience, and gentle guidance. Herbal remedies might be prescribed for the physical symptoms of grief: loss of appetite, sleeplessness, the exhaustion that comes from prolonged sorrow. But more importantly, she would help mourners understand their experience in spiritual terms, providing frameworks for making meaning out of loss, for maintaining connection with deceased loved ones in healthy ways, for eventually finding the strength to re-engage with life while carrying their grief as a sacred part of their ongoing experience. As winter slowly gives way to spring in our imagined medieval year, we encounter rituals of renewal and rebirth that celebrate the return of life to the earth. These ceremonies mark not only the changing of the seasons, but also opportunities for personal and community renewal, chances to release what no longer serves and embrace new possibilities. Picture the wise woman preparing for the spring cleansing rituals that would mark the end of winter's confinement. Her cottage, which has been sealed against the cold for months, is open to the fresh air that carries the sense of awakening earth. Windows are thrown wide, doors are propped open, and the stale air of winter is ceremonially expelled. The cleansing begins with the preparation of special water infused with herbs of purification and renewal. Early spring plants, the first tender nettles, young cleavers, fresh plantain leaves, are gathered and steeped in water drawn from a running stream or sacred well. This water will be used throughout the cleansing process, sprinkled in corners where stagnant energy might have accumulated, used to wash surfaces that have been closed away from light and air. The wise woman moves through her cottage systematically, working from the innermost rooms outward, from the darkest corners toward the light. She carries with her not only the cleansing water, but also burning herbs whose smoke will purify the air and carry away the accumulated heaviness of winter. Each room is attended to carefully, with attention not only to physical cleanliness, but also to the spiritual atmosphere of the space. Personal cleansing rituals accompany the cleaning of the physical environment. The wise woman prepares special baths infused with herbs that will cleanse both body and spirit, washing away the accumulated fatigue and stagnation of the dark months. Nettle for its strengthening properties, dandelion for its cleansing effects on the liver and blood, violet leaves for their cooling and soothing qualities. The bath becomes a ceremony of renewal, a conscious letting go of winter's limitations and an opening to spring's possibilities. The wise woman enters the herbal water with gratitude for having survived another winter, with awareness of the new life stirring within her own body as it responds to lengthening days and warming air. Community cleansing rituals might involve the blessing of wells and streams that have been covered or neglected during the winter months. The wise woman would lead small groups to sacred water sources, carrying offerings of flowers and herbs to cast into the water as gifts of gratitude for its life-giving properties. These water blessing ceremonies served multiple purposes: practical assessment of water quality after winter's freeze and thaw cycles, spiritual renewal of the community's connection to this essential element, and opportunities for neighbors to gather and reconnect after months of relative isolation. The blessing of seeds for the spring planting becomes another important ritual activity. Picture the wise woman sitting at her wooden table, surrounded by small packets of seeds saved from last year's harvest or carefully selected from various sources. Each variety is examined carefully, tested for viability, blessed for the growing season ahead. The blessing ritual might involve laying the seeds out on a clean cloth under the light of the full moon, allowing them to absorb lunar energy that was believed to enhance their fertility and growth potential. Prayers would be spoken over them, asking for favorable weather, protection from pests and diseases, abundance in the harvest to come. Some seeds receive special treatment based on their particular needs or symbolic significance. Grain seeds might be blessed with prayers for the community's survival and prosperity. Herb seeds might be consecrated for their healing properties, with specific intentions set for the medicines they would eventually provide. Flower seeds might be blessed for their beauty and their ability to attract beneficial insects to the garden. The wise woman would also prepare special soil preparations designed to enhance the fertility of the planting areas. Compost that has been aging through the winter months would be blessed and mixed with herbs believed to promote plant growth. Ash from the winter's fires, rich in minerals, would be saved and consecrated for addition to the garden soil. These soil preparation rituals acknowledge the partnership between human intention and natural processes, the recognition that successful gardening requires not only practical knowledge and hard work, but also spiritual alignment with the forces of growth and abundance. As spring progresses towards summer, we encounter rituals designed to protect and nurture the growing crops through the vulnerable stages of their development. The wise woman becomes a guardian not only of human health, but also of the agricultural processes that sustain community life. Picture her making her rounds through the village in the early morning hours, when dew still sparkles on the emerging plants and the air is fresh with the sense of new growth. She carries with her a small container of blessed water mixed with protective herbs, which she sprinkles carefully around the edges of gardens and fields. This blessing activity is both practical and spiritual. The herbal water may contain natural pest deterrents that help protect young plants from insect damage. But more importantly, the ritual creates a sense of partnership between the gardener and the natural world, an acknowledgement that successful cultivation requires cooperation with forces beyond human control. Weather magic becomes particularly important during the growing season. While the wise woman cannot control storms or droughts, she can perform rituals designed to work with weather patterns rather than against them, to help her community adapt to whatever conditions arise. Drought-breaking rituals might involve the creation of special water offerings, precious liquid poured onto sacred ground as a symbolic gift to encourage the return of rain. The entire community might participate in such ceremonies, contributing small amounts of their stored water to a collective offering that demonstrates their willingness to share their resources with the earth that sustains them. Storm protection rituals took different forms, designed not to prevent severe weather, but to minimize its destructive potential. The wise woman might prepare special bundles of herbs believed to have calming properties: lavender for peace, chamomile for gentleness, rose petals for love, which would be burned as offerings when storm clouds gathered on the horizon. These ceremonies served important psychological functions, giving communities a sense of agency in the face of natural forces they could not control. The act of performing the ritual, of coming together in shared intention, helped reduce anxiety and created social bonds that would prove valuable when dealing with whatever challenges the weather might bring. Imagine now the gentle rhythm of summer healing work as the wise woman's garden reaches its peak abundance and people arrive seeking remedies for the ailments that warm weather brings. Her days begin before dawn, when the morning air is cool and still, perfect for gathering the herbs that will become the day's medicines. The summer cottage has been transformed by the growing season. Every available space is utilized for the cultivation of healing plants. Window boxes overflow with culinary and medicinal herbs. Larger plants like comfrey and elder grow in carefully tended plots behind the house. Even the roof might support small gardens of drought-resistant plants like houseleek and sedum. The wise woman moves through this abundance with practiced ease, selecting exactly what she needs for each day's work. Her trained eye can assess the readiness of plants for harvest, knowing instinctively when leaves have reached their peak potency, when flowers are at their most fragrant, when roots have stored the maximum concentration of active compounds. The processing of fresh herbs becomes a daily ritual of transformation. Picture the peaceful scene of the cottage kitchen in the early morning hours. Bundles of freshly cut herbs lie on clean wooden tables, waiting to be sorted and prepared. Some will be used immediately, crushed and steeped for teas that must be consumed while fresh. Others will be carefully dried for winter storage, or processed into tinctures and oils that will preserve their healing properties for months to come. The wise woman works with quiet concentration, her hands moving with the confidence that comes from years of practice. She strips leaves from stems with efficient motions, sorts flowers from debris, washes roots in clear running water. Each plant receives exactly the treatment it requires based on her deep understanding of how different processing methods affect the final medicine. The preparation of summer cooling remedies becomes particularly important as the hot months progress. Medieval people understood the need to balance the body's internal temperature, and the wise woman would prepare special combinations of herbs designed to cool and refresh those suffering from heat exhaustion or fever. Picture her preparing a batch of cooling tea, perfect for a hot summer afternoon. Mint leaves provide immediate refreshment, while elderflower offers gentle cooling properties. Rose hips contribute vitamin C and a pleasant tartness, while lemon balm adds its calming effects. Each ingredient is measured not just by quantity, but by the wisdom of experience, adjusted for the specific needs of those who will consume the blend. The tea preparation becomes a meditation on the balance between hot and cold, dry and moist, the fundamental principles that medieval healers used to understand health and disease. The wise woman tastes the blend as it steeps, adjusting the proportions until the flavor and energy feel exactly right for the current weather conditions and the needs of her community. Summer also brings opportunities for the creation of flower essences, those subtle preparations that were believed to capture not just the physical properties of plants, but their spiritual signatures as well. Picture the wise woman rising before dawn to gather flowers at the moment when their dew-covered petals first catch the light of the rising sun. The process of creating flower essences requires perfect timing and conditions. The flowers must be gathered at their peak bloom when their life force is strongest, and they must be processed immediately to preserve their subtle energies. The wise woman works quickly but gently, floating the perfect blossoms in bowls of pure spring water, then placing these bowls in locations where they will receive the full energy of the morning sun. As the sun rises higher, its rays pass through the floating flowers and into the water below, creating what medieval practitioners believed was a liquid memory of the plant's spiritual properties. This process continues for several hours, with the wise woman monitoring the bowls carefully, sensing the moment when the water has absorbed all it can of the flower's essence. The finished flower water would be preserved with a small amount of brandy or wine, then stored in dark bottles to protect it from light. These essences were used for emotional and spiritual healing, administered in tiny doses to address conditions of the heart and mind that physical herbs could not touch. Rose essence for love and emotional healing, lavender essence for peace and anxiety, chamomile essence for those who needed to develop patience and gentleness with themselves and others. Each essence carried not just the chemical compounds of its source plant, but something more subtle, what the wise woman might have called the plant's soul or its divine signature. The creation of protective oils reaches its peak during the summer months, when the herb garden provides the raw materials for these powerful preparations. Picture the wise woman selecting herbs specifically for their protective properties. Rosemary for mental clarity and spiritual protection, sage for wisdom and purification, thyme for courage and strength. The oil-making process begins with the careful selection of a carrier oil, often olive oil, that has been blessed or oil-pressed from nuts grown locally. The herbs are added to the oil in specific proportions, based on recipes that have been passed down through generations of wise women, each adding her own observations and modifications to the traditional formulas. The oil and herbs are then subjected to a slow infusion process that may take days or weeks to complete. Some methods involve gentle heating over a low fire, with the mixture stirred regularly to prevent burning. Other techniques rely on solar infusion, with jars of oil and herbs placed in sunny locations where the heat of the sun gradually extracts the plant's essences. Throughout this process, the wise woman monitors the oil carefully, checking its color, scent, and texture as the infusion progresses. She may add additional herbs if the blend seems to need strengthening, or strain out plant material if it begins to cloud the oil. The goal is to create a preparation that captures the maximum therapeutic potential of the herbs while remaining stable and pleasant to use. The finished oils serve multiple purposes in the wise woman's practice. They might be used for massage, helping to ease muscle pain and tension while providing the protective benefits of the herbs. They could be applied to the skin as protective barriers against negative influences, or worn as perfumes that carry both pleasant fragrances and spiritual significance. Some oils are prepared specifically for ritual use, designed to anoint candles, ritual tools, or sacred spaces. These preparations often contain more exotic ingredients when available. Frankincense resin for its connection to divine realms, myrrh for its protective properties, or locally available tree resins that serve similar purposes. The wise woman's summer work extends beyond the creation of medicines and magical preparations to include the teaching and training of others who seek to learn her arts. Picture a small group of women and older children gathered in the cottage garden on a warm afternoon, listening intently as their teacher explains the properties and uses of various plants. This instruction takes place not in formal classroom settings, but through hands-on experience in the garden and workshop. Students learn by doing, helping to harvest herbs at the proper times, assisting in the preparation of medicines, observing the subtle signs that indicate when a preparation is ready or needs adjustment. The wise woman teaches not just technical skills, but also the attitudes and approaches that make for successful practice. Respect for the plant world, patience with slow natural processes, attention to detail, and the ability to trust one's intuition when recipes must be adapted to changing circumstances. Students learn to recognize plants not just by their appearance, but by their scents, textures, and the subtle energies they emanate. They practice the art of plant identification in different seasons and growing conditions, developing the observational skills that will serve them throughout their lives as herbalists and healers. The teaching extends to diagnostic skills as well, how to assess a patient's condition through observation and questioning, how to determine which herbs will be most effective for specific ailments, how to adjust dosages based on age, constitution, and severity of symptoms. But perhaps most importantly, students learn the ethical principles that govern the wise woman's practice. The obligation to do no harm, the importance of working within one's level of competence, the necessity of referring serious cases to more experienced practitioners, and the responsibility to use magical and healing skills only for beneficial purposes. As our gentle journey through the medieval year continues, we find ourselves approaching the harvest season once again, coming full circle in our exploration of the wise woman's world. But now, we turn our attention to some of the more mysterious aspects of medieval magical practice, the rituals and beliefs that dealt with forces beyond the ordinary world of herbs and healing. Picture the wise woman preparing for a night of what medieval people called dream flying or journeying, practices that modern anthropologists might recognize as forms of shamanic trance or guided meditation. These experiences were understood as actual travel to other realms, opportunities to gather information, communicate with spirits, or retrieve lost souls. The preparation for such journeys began hours before the actual practice. The wise woman would fast during the day, consuming only water and perhaps small amounts of honey to maintain her energy while keeping her body light and receptive. Her cottage would be carefully prepared, with protective herbs burned to create sacred space and candles arranged to provide gentle lighting that would not disturb her altered state of consciousness. Special herbal preparations might be used to induce the trance state necessary for spirit travel. These were not the dramatic hallucinogens of popular imagination, but subtle plant allies that enhanced meditation and encouraged vivid dreaming. Mugwort was particularly favored for this purpose, often prepared as a tea to be consumed before the journey, or burned as incense to create an atmosphere conducive to spiritual experience. The wise woman would lie down on her simple bed, covered with blankets that had been blessed for protection during spirit travel. She might hold in her hands a special stone or piece of jewelry that would serve as an anchor to her physical body, ensuring that she could find her way back from whatever realms she visited. The journey itself would begin with deep relaxation and controlled breathing, techniques designed to quiet the ordinary mind and open awareness to subtler levels of reality. The wise woman might visualize herself leaving her physical body, perhaps in the form of a bird or other animal that could travel freely between worlds. In these journeys, she might visit the spirits of plants to learn about their healing properties, consult with the souls of deceased wise women who could offer guidance and instruction, or travel to otherworldly locations where lost or stolen objects might be recovered. Sometimes, the journeys involved healing work for community members whose illnesses were believed to have spiritual as well as physical components. The return from such journeys required careful attention to grounding and integration. The wise woman would move slowly back to ordinary consciousness, recording in her journal any important information or images she had received. She might prepare special teas to help her body readjust to normal waking awareness, and always she would express gratitude to the spirits and forces that had assisted in her journey. These practices were not undertaken lightly or frequently. They required significant preparation and energy, and carried perceived risks that demanded respect and caution. The wise woman who practiced such techniques did so only after years of training, and only when the need was truly serious. Another mysterious aspect of medieval magical practice involved what might be called sympathetic magic. Rituals based on the principle that like affects like, that symbolic actions performed with proper intention could influence corresponding situations in the physical world. Picture the wise woman working by candlelight to create a healing poppet, a small figure designed to represent someone who was too ill to travel to her cottage for treatment. The poppet would be made from natural materials, perhaps cloth stuffed with herbs appropriate to the patient's condition, or clay mixed with soil from the patient's own land. The creation of the poppet was itself a ritual process. As the wise woman shaped the figure, she would hold the patient clearly in her mind, visualizing them in perfect health, speaking their names softly as she worked. Hair or nail clippings from the patient might be incorporated into the poppet, creating what was believed to be a direct magical connection between the figure and the person it represented. Once completed, the poppet would be treated as if it were the actual patient. Healing herbs might be bound to it, healing oils applied to areas corresponding to the patient's symptoms, gentle warmth provided by placing it near the fire. The wise woman might speak to the poppet as if addressing the patient directly, offering encouragement and visualization of recovery. The poppet healing would continue for as long as necessary, with the wise woman checking on it regularly and adjusting the treatment as her intuition suggested. When news arrived that the patient had recovered, the poppet would be carefully dismantled, its materials returned to the earth with gratitude for their service. Such practices worked not through supernatural intervention, but through the psychological and spiritual effects of focused intention and symbolic action. The creation and treatment of the poppet helped the wise woman maintain concentrated attention on the patient's healing, while the ritualistic nature of the work helped marshal her emotional and spiritual energies in service of the healing intention. Similar principles govern the creation of protective images designed to guard specific locations or individuals. Picture the wise woman crafting a small guardian figure to be placed in someone's garden, designed to protect the growing plants from damage by weather, pests, or malicious interference. The guardian figure might be carved from wood taken from a tree known for its protective properties. Oak for strength and endurance, rowan for its traditional association with magical protection, or elder for its reputation as a powerful ally against negative forces. The carving would be done with ceremony and intention, each cut of the knife invested with protective purpose. Once carved, the figure would be consecrated with oils and herbs chosen for their protective properties. It might be wrapped in red thread, that color being associated with life force and the power to ward off harm. Small objects with protective significance, bits of iron, fragments of blessed salt, tiny crystals or stones, might be incorporated into the figure or buried with it when it was installed in its protective location. The installation of the guardian figure would itself be a ritual occasion. The wise woman might choose a specific time, perhaps the full moon for maximum power, or dawn for its associations with new beginnings and fresh protection. She would dig the hole for the figure with ceremony, speaking words of invocation as she prepared the site. As the figure was placed in position, prayers or incantations would be spoken, clearly stating the protective purpose for which it was intended. Offerings might be made to the local spirits, asking for their cooperation in the protective work. The earth would be replaced around the figure with careful attention, and the site might be marked with protective symbols drawn in the soil. These guardian figures were understood to work by creating focal points for protective energy, places where beneficial influences could gather and from which they could extend their influence over the surrounding area. The wise woman who created them took responsibility for their ongoing maintenance, checking periodically to ensure they remained undisturbed and renewing their consecration when necessary. As autumn deepens in our imagined medieval year, we encounter some of the most solemn and powerful rituals in the wise woman's practice. Ceremonies designed to communicate with the spirits of the deceased and to maintain the delicate balance between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The approach of winter was understood as a time when the veil between worlds grew thin, when communication with deceased ancestors and spirit guides became more accessible. But such communication required careful preparation and protection, as the dark months were also believed to bring increased activity from less benevolent spirits. Picture the wise woman preparing her cottage for the long nights of winter divination and spirit work. Special candles are prepared, made from wax that has been blessed and infused with herbs associated with spiritual protection. Salt mixed with protective herbs is sprinkled along windowsills and doorframes, creating barriers that unwanted spirits cannot cross. A special altar might be created for winter spirit work, placed in the quietest corner of the cottage, where it would be undisturbed by daily activities. On this altar, the wise woman arranges objects that facilitate communication with the spirit world. Crystals or polished stones for their ability to hold and focus energy, bowls of pure water that can serve as scrying mirrors, and always representations of deceased teachers and guides who continue to offer wisdom from beyond the physical realm. The altar becomes a focal point for meditation and prayer throughout the winter months. Each evening, the wise woman might spend time in quiet communion with the spirits, lighting candles and incense, speaking softly to her guides, asking for wisdom and protection during the dark season ahead. Sometimes community members would seek her assistance in communicating with deceased relatives, perhaps hoping to receive guidance about important decisions, or seeking reassurance that departed loved ones had found peace in the afterlife. Such requests were not undertaken lightly, as communication with the dead was understood to carry both opportunities and risks. The wise woman would begin such work with extensive preparation, fasting, and purification to ensure that she was in the proper spiritual state for such serious undertaking. The persons seeking communication would also be required to prepare themselves through prayer, meditation, and sometimes herbal preparations designed to enhance spiritual sensitivity while providing protection. The actual communication might take place through various methods. The wise woman might enter a trance state and speak with the voice of the deceased spirit, relaying messages to the living relative. Or she might teach the person to interpret signs and symbols that appeared during meditation, helping them recognize the subtle ways in which spiritual communication typically occurs. Sometimes the communication involved divination tools, special stones cast in patterns that revealed spiritual messages, or cards made from natural materials and marked with symbols that had traditional meanings in the practice of spirit communication. The wise woman would interpret these signs based on her years of training and experience, always careful to distinguish between genuine spiritual communication and the projections of wishful thinking. The session would always conclude with ceremonies of gratitude and dismissal, ensuring that spirit contacts were properly thanked and that all parties, living and dead, were able to return to their appropriate realms. Protective rituals would be performed to seal the spiritual workspace and prevent any unwanted spiritual activity from continuing after the formal communication had ended. These practices served important psychological and social functions in medieval communities. They provided comfort to the bereaved, helping them feel that their relationships with deceased loved ones could continue in modified form. They offered guidance during difficult decisions, as people could feel they were consulting not just their own limited wisdom, but the accumulated knowledge of their ancestors. But perhaps most importantly, they maintained the community's connection to its history and traditions, ensuring that the wisdom of previous generations was not lost, but continued to inform and guide the decisions of the living. As winter reaches its deepest point in our gentle journey through the medieval year, we encounter the most profound and transformative of all magical practices, the rituals of personal transformation and spiritual rebirth that wise women undertook during the darkest months of the year. Picture the wise woman beginning a period of intensive spiritual practice that might last for days or weeks. She withdraws from her ordinary activities, arranging for others to handle urgent healing work, while she turns her attention inward for deep spiritual labor. Her cottage becomes a hermitage, a sacred space dedicated entirely to the work of inner transformation. All unnecessary objects are removed or covered, leaving only the essentials needed for basic survival and spiritual practice. The space is cleansed and consecrated with particular care, as it will serve as the container for intensive spiritual work. The wise woman begins each day before dawn, rising in the darkness to kindle her fire and begin the gentle rituals that will structure her spiritual retreat. She might begin with meditation, sitting quietly in the pre-dawn darkness, allowing her mind to settle into the deep stillness that makes transformation possible. Herbal preparations play important roles in supporting this intensive spiritual work. Teas made from herbs associated with purification and spiritual opening, red clover for cleansing, nettle for strength, rose hips for opening the heart. These preparations are consumed not just for their physical effects, but as part of the ceremonial structure that supports the inner work. The wise woman might undertake periods of fasting, consuming only water and small amounts of honey, allowing her body to release its attachment to ordinary physical needs and become more receptive to subtle spiritual energies. Such fasting was always done carefully, with attention to maintaining enough physical strength to support the spiritual work without becoming dangerously weakened. Dream work becomes particularly important during these retreat periods. The wise woman might sleep for shorter periods, but with greater intensity, using herbal preparations to enhance the vividness and meaning of her dreams. She records these dreams carefully in her journal, looking for patterns and messages that guide her ongoing spiritual development. Sometimes the retreat involves specific practices designed to release old patterns and embrace new ways of being. The wise woman might spend time in meditation on each phase of her life, honoring what she has learned and accomplished, while consciously releasing attachments that no longer serve her growth. She might perform ceremonies of forgiveness, both for herself and for others who have caused her pain or difficulty. These rituals involve not just mental processes, but physical actions, perhaps writing grievances on pieces of bark that are then burned in the fire, or casting stones into running water as symbols of burdens being released. The retreat includes ceremonies of gratitude as well, conscious appreciation for all the gifts and opportunities that life has provided. The wise woman might spend entire days in contemplation of specific blessings, allowing herself to fully feel and express her thankfulness for the abundance that surrounds her. As the retreat progresses, periods of intensive spiritual practice alternate with times of gentle integration, allowing the wise woman to process and absorb the insights and changes that are occurring within her consciousness. She might spend quiet hours in simple activities, spinning thread, mending clothes, preparing simple meals that keep her hands busy while allowing her mind to continue its deeper work. The conclusion of the retreat is marked by ceremonies of integration and commitment, rituals that help the wise woman bring her spiritual insights back into engagement with the world. She might create new protective talismans to carry with her, or establish new daily practices that will help maintain the spiritual clarity achieved during her retreat. The return to ordinary activity is gradual and ceremonial. The wise woman slowly reopens her cottage to visitors, gradually resumes her healing work, carefully maintains the spiritual insights and practices that have emerged from her intensive inner work. These retreat periods were understood as essential for maintaining the spiritual clarity and power needed for effective magical practice. They provided opportunities for renewal and growth that kept the wise woman's work fresh and vital, preventing the stagnation that could come from routine practice without deeper spiritual development. As our gentle journey through the medieval year draws toward its close, we find ourselves returning to the seasonal celebrations that mark the turning of the wheel of time. But now, we understand these festivals not just as community gatherings, but as expressions of the deep magical principles that govern the wise woman's understanding of the world. Picture the preparation for the winter solstice, that pivotal moment when the darkness reaches its peak and the light begins its slow return. For the wise woman, this celebration represents far more than marking time. It embodies the fundamental principle of transformation that underlies all magical practice. In the days leading up to the solstice, the wise woman prepares special candles that will burn throughout the longest night. These are not ordinary candles, but sacred lights that have been created specifically for this moment. The wax has been blessed during its preparation, infused with herbs that support hope and renewal, consecrated with prayers for the return of light to the world. The colors of these candles carry symbolic significance. Deep red for the life force that persists even in the depths of winter. Gold for the solar energy that will begin its return. White for the purity of spiritual light that illuminates even the darkest moments. Each candle is carved with symbols of protection and blessing, personal marks that connect it to the wise woman's specific intentions for the coming year. On the night of the solstice itself, the wise woman begins her vigil at sunset, lighting her sacred candles as darkness falls. She will maintain this vigil throughout the night, keeping the lights burning as symbols of faith that dawn will come, that the cycle of death and rebirth continues, that hope persists even in the darkest hours. Throughout the night, she maintains a gentle meditation, reviewing the year that is ending and setting intentions for the year to come. She might engage in divination practices, seeking guidance about the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. Or she might simply sit in quiet contemplation, allowing herself to fully experience this moment of transition between the dying year and the year being born. As dawn approaches, the wise woman prepares for the moment of solar return. She might go outside despite the cold, positioning herself to greet the first rays of the returning sun. Or she might remain indoors, watching through her window as the darkness slowly gives way to light, offering prayers of gratitude for the renewal of the solar cycle. The solstice celebration continues through the day with rituals of blessing and purification designed to clear away the accumulated heaviness of the dark season and prepare for the gradual return of spring. The wise woman might prepare special foods: bread baked with herbs of blessing, tea made from carefully hoarded summer herbs, honey saved from the autumn harvest, that connect the celebration to the abundance of warmer seasons. Community members might visit throughout the day, seeking blessings for the coming year, sharing in the feast of celebration, participating in group rituals that strengthen the bonds between neighbors and friends. The wise woman's cottage becomes a center of light and warmth, a beacon of hope and renewal in the depth of winter. But the solstice celebration also includes more private rituals, personal ceremonies that mark the wise woman's individual journey through the cycles of darkness and light. She might perform divination about her own path in the coming year, seeking guidance about how to best serve her community and develop her own spiritual gifts. She might create new protective talismans to carry her through the remaining winter months, or consecrate tools and materials that will be used in the year's magical work. These private ceremonies are as important as the community celebrations, ensuring that her personal spiritual practice remains aligned with the larger cycles of natural and cosmic renewal. As the winter slowly gives way to spring once again, we come to understand that the wise woman's life follows the same cyclical patterns as the natural world she serves. Her practices ebb and flow with the seasons. Her spiritual work deepens and lightens in response to the rhythms of darkness and light, growth and rest, activity and contemplation. The rituals we have explored together, the healing ceremonies, the protective magic, the seasonal celebrations, the communication with spirits, the practices of personal transformation. All of these form an integrated whole, a complete system of living in harmony with the forces that govern both the natural world and human consciousness. The wise woman of medieval times was neither the evil sorceress of popular imagination nor the romanticized earth goddess of modern fantasy. She was a practical person with extraordinary skills, someone who had learned to work with the subtle energies that flow through all living things, who had developed the sensitivity to perceive patterns and connections that remained invisible to others. Her magic was not about dramatic supernatural interventions, but about understanding and cooperating with the natural laws that govern health, growth, relationship, and spiritual development. Her rituals were not exotic ceremonies performed in mysterious locations, but practical applications of timeless wisdom carried out in ordinary cottages and common landscapes by people who had learned to see the sacred dimension of everyday life. The strange rituals that medieval witches actually performed were strange only because they have been forgotten by a world that has lost touch with the rhythms of natural life, that has traded the wisdom of plant and season for the convenience of artificial systems, that has chosen the illusion of control over the reality of cooperation with forces greater than individual will. But the wisdom embodied in these ancient practices remains available to us. We can still learn to read the subtle signs that indicate when healing is needed, when protection is called for, when transformation is ready to occur. We can still develop the sensitivity that allows us to work with, rather than against, the natural patterns that govern health and happiness. We can still create sacred space in our ordinary lives, still honor the cycles of growth and rest that sustain all living things, still find ways to connect with the deeper currents of meaning and purpose that flow beneath the surface of daily existence. The cottage at the edge of the village still exists, though we may have to look for it with eyes that have learned to see beyond the merely material. The wise woman still offers her services, though we may need to develop ears that can hear the whispered wisdom of plant and season, wind and water. The strange rituals continue, carried out by those who have remembered what it means to live in conscious relationship with the mystery that surrounds and sustains us. The candles still burn through the long nights. The herbs still offer their healing gifts. The seasons still turn in their eternal dance of death and rebirth. And so our gentle journey through the world of medieval magical practice comes full circle, returning us to our own time with perhaps a deeper appreciation for the wisdom that flows beneath the surface of historical events, the human stories that give meaning to the bare facts of chronicles and documents. The wise women of the past have much to teach us about living skillfully in an uncertain world, about finding healing and hope in the midst of difficulty, about maintaining connection to the sources of renewal that sustain life through all its changes and challenges. As you prepare for sleep tonight, perhaps you can carry with you some small portion of their wisdom, the knowledge that healing is always possible, that protection is available to those who seek it with sincere hearts, that the cycles of difficulty and ease, darkness and light continue their eternal dance, always leading toward renewal and hope. Rest now in the peace that comes from knowing that you are part of something larger than yourself, connected to the same sources of wisdom and strength that sustained our ancestors through their trials and tribulations. Sleep gently, knowing that the light returns even from the deepest darkness, that spring follows even the harshest winter, that hope persists even when all seems lost. The strange and wonderful rituals of the wise women continue around us still, in the turning of the seasons, in the healing power of plants, in the love that connects us to each other and to the living world that is our home. May you rest peacefully in that knowledge, and may your dreams be filled with the gentle wisdom of those who have walked this path before us. Sleep well, dear listener, and may you wake refreshed and renewed, ready to find your own ways of living wisely in harmony with the rhythms of life that surround and sustain us all.